The snow had sealed her lips. The Hell's Angels patch on his chest felt like a vote, one that would decide whether a small town kept its children or let them freeze. Welcome to Where Shadows Speak. Before we start this story, tell us where in the world you are watching from. And if you believe kindness should never die, please subscribe and help us keep stories like this alive. He found her pressed to red brick like a note someone had folded wrong. The courtyard was a white hush. The school's loud fluorescent life muffled by walls and glass. Boots left sloppy prints. Her backpack straps were frozen to her coat, her breath came in shards. Marcus, Mac, Romero didn't think first of colors or chapters. He thought of the smallness of her, how she weighed nothing when he scooped her up. His Harley sat half-buried, engines still ticking the way old machines sigh. Mac's jacket was heavy leather, the Hell's Angels patch stitched over his heart the way some men carry a name. He had ridden 6 miles through a storm that blurred county lines because a neighbor had texted a picture. A child outside, alone. The text didn't say the school was to blame. It didn't need to. Mac had sons, he had cousins. His sister taught middle school down the road. A child outside in a blizzard was an emergency without permits. He moved like someone who'd learned how quickly small things could die without attention: flowers, engines, people. Inside the vestibule, he carried her like contraband, and the fluorescent light hit snow on his shoulders. Teachers turned, and the room snapped tight. The nurse's chair scraped. The principal's face folded into 1,000 business shapes, and then melted into something smaller: fear. They took her, layered blankets, checked fingers and lips, called for thermometers and for explanations. Mac stood back with snow melting off his beard, and realized he didn't know her name. He'd never hoped to be the kind of man who had to ask, but the world had a way of handing that sort of role to those who showed up. He wanted to ask faster, louder, but the truth sat heavy. A child had been left outside by an adult in a building meant to protect her. That thought made a slow, cold anger build under his ribs. He had been around unfairness before. The patch on his back had taught him to measure threats. This was smaller than gangs and bigger than police reports. This was a promise. Someone would answer. They called her Ellie. The nurse read the name off a wet pink tag, and it sounded thin in the tight room. Ellie kept blinking like the light was too sharp. Her voice came as a thin thread. Mac crouched by the cot, every line in his face pulled like leather. He had the kind of hands you trusted to lift things that were broken, hands that had once steadied a cranked engine and later, in a quieter life, lifted a toddler from a creek. He listened to the nurse's measured words: hypothermia, moderate possible complications, and let them pass without panic. Panic didn't help, action did. He wrapped his gloves around her fingers, felt the cold audibly move through fabric. Outside, the wind had not stopped. Inside, there was a quiet that was almost criminal. Kids in class, teachers moving, a town that believed institutions would guard the vulnerable. Mac thought of how fast institutions could freeze, how bureaucracy loved paperwork more than warmth. He heard a teacher ask the principal, the question everyone eventually asked: who let her out? The answer came like a slow drip: substitute teacher, Miss Harrow. A name that meant nothing until the way people looked at it pulled a new shape into the room. Disbelief, memory, murmured admissions. One teacher said she'd heard Miss Harrow complain about show-offs in the lounge. Another remembered the woman staring too long at student projects like they were sharp things. Mac's jaw tightened. He'd carried a reputation several towns over: road scrapes, bar fights, a chest full of decisions made in seconds, but he'd never been called to be the loud thing in a gentle room. The decision came quiet. He would make a call. Not to threaten, not to parade, to gather presence. When he asked the principal to lock down the courtyard doors and to bring the substitute to the nurse's office, his voice did not tremble. People finally noticed the patch on his jacket, the weight behind it. The principal hesitated, then agreed. Mac watched Ellie's breath slow into something steadier. She worried about her project, about class, about small things that belonged to children. His chest ached because she was right. Children carry what adults cannot imagine leaving behind. He took his phone out and thumbed a number that widened the room. A neighbor he trusted, a brother in the club, someone who would move like thunder if he asked. The first Harley cut through the snow 2 towns over like a knife through canvas. Low, measured. A sound that makes people look out kitchen windows and remember the names they don't say. Within 40 minutes, a dozen bikes dotted the school's dusty lot, leather jackets, and the swollen breath of engines. Mac stood at the nurse's window while teachers explained the timeline. Ellie had been sent out after answering a question. The kids said, an advanced question. She'd answered it. The substitute had punished her, told her to learn humility, told her to go outside and think about respect. The story picked at the room like a toothache. Mac's fingers went to the patch on his jacket without meaning to, as if touching a talisman. He'd been in the club 2 decades. He'd ridden with men who'd done worse with less cause. He'd seen mercy in strange places, at funerals, in hospital hallways, in kitchens where bikers patched neighbors' roofs in exchange for coffee. When the first rumble of 50 more bikes coughed up the highway, the principal's staff gathered at windows like people watching a storm. No one called the police. They called the club. There was a decision behind that. Police were paper and procedure. Bikers were a presence that made things stop long enough for truth to be heard. Mac didn't want a riot. He wanted attention, and attention when it belonged to the wrong people was a safer kind of justice. The club arrived the way old families come. No banners, no threats, only bodies and faces people had heard of but not really known. The president rode slowly to the front. A man named Hank Sullivan, 37 years of road under his boots, and a softness around the eyes that made him look like a man who'd kept a secret all his life. He walked inside at Mac's nod, hands empty. He met the principal in the hall and his voice was small but steady. "Where is the teacher?" The principal's face lost color. The room smelled of melted snow and coffee and fear. The teachers produced schedules. The assistant principal stumbled through a version of events. Sully listened without interrupting, and his silence felt like a metronome, methodical, inevitable. Outside, bikes idled like a patient audience. Parents began to gather. Phones came alive. The town that had once been too busy to notice a child shivering outside was now taking in a different shape. 100 men showing up like a second weather system. Inside the nurse's office, Miss Harrow sat with her hands folded like someone at a chapel, her face tight in a way shame carves. She told a story that fit the shape of someone who had convinced herself of a rightness. Ellie posed. She had to put her in her place, make her understand that adults mattered more than tests. Her voice tried for contrition, but came out brittle. The teachers who listened looked at one another with the private horror of people realizing they'd missed one more corner where cruelty lives. Mac watched her from the doorway and felt something hours old and new at once. The urge to protect unmeasured by politics or badge. He thought of his mother, who once stitched his first cut jacket by the glow of a gas lamp, who taught him that children needed grown things to make them safe. Sully's questions were careful. He didn't shout. He didn't demand retribution. He asked for explanation, for the timeline, for the minutes Ellie had stood in the cold. The substitute kept circling back to humility, to discipline, to the idea that a child needed to learn consequences. The nurse, Patricia, who'd been a school nurse longer than Mac had been alive, spoke with that quiet authority people yield to. "We are responsible for the children's safety. If you send a child outside in a storm, you have failed your duty." The legal word wasn't thrown yet: neglect, endangerment, but it hummed in the room like a power line. Parents started arriving, faces raw, cell phones ready. Social media, swift and indiscriminate, began to stitch a picture. A child sent into a blizzard by a woman paid to protect her. That picture ignited something the town had held back, a need for clarity, and a hunger for someone to act while the system thought. Sully left the office and the world outside seemed to hold its breath. He walked to the lot and stood in front of the bikes. He didn't make speeches. He didn't post threats. He told Mac in a low voice, "Keep it clean. We're here to show the town that this won't be ignored." Mac nodded. Clean meant no intimidation, no violence, only presence, support, and the kind of organized attention a paper trail couldn't erase. The men began to move, not like an army but like an old family dispersing into roles. Who would talk to the principal? Who would stay with the family? Who would keep the perimeter free of cameras so the child could heal without an audience? They became a human shield, which is only another way of saying they took responsibility. Ellie's father arrived with shaking hands and a face too young for this kind of brokenness. He had driven in a truck that had run out of town limits and common sense. His phone was a mess of texts and calls from a workplace that expected productivity over presence. He had not been around the morning she was sent out. He had trusted the school. Now he sat under fluorescent light and did what fathers do when they are small and necessary. He held his daughter's shoe, folded it into his palm like a relic, and apologized for things his heart could not fix. Mac stayed beside them, quiet, a wall that knew how to absorb anger without letting it turn destructive. The town school board agreed to an immediate meeting in 2 hours. The district superintendent's name was called on 3 phones at once. Sully organized drivers to take coats, soup, blankets to families who had chronic heating problems in town, an older woman with 3 kids down on Maple, a carpenter who'd lost his job. Because justice, for this group, wasn't just headline making. It was fixing the places where neglect begins. The bikes created a ripple of people who wanted to help, and before long hot drinks were handed out, coats redistributed, a volunteer roster formed on folded paper. But under the practical things, a deeper thing moved. The town was learning to see the invisible seams. Who watches the watchers? Who ensures teachers aren't weaponizing their own frustrations? Mac thought about escalation. The patch on his back had a history of men stepping in when muscles and minutes mattered. He wanted charges filed, the substitute removed, the principal to answer for doors left unlocked. He wanted policies rewritten. The sheriff arrived, Deputy Lauren Hayes, walking slowly because he knew Mac from before the badge days. They had once shared a road and a promise. Lauren had been young and on a bike before life taught him different uniforms. He didn't spit authority, he brought a memory of fraternity. Lauren met Mac with a look that said he understood what could happen when biker presence and law enforcement tangled. He asked for witness statements. He asked for patience, but the word felt thin. Mac replied with a clear direction. Get us the tape, lock the door logs, tell us exactly who left the courtyard open and why. The sheriff's jaw tightened. The town's machinery shifted into motion, noisy and slow, but now there were people there to shove it along. Outside, the motorcycles shivered in the lot like a waiting storm, and the people who had come because a child was cold kept their hands busy, passing thermoses, handing extra mittens to parents, whispering that they would not let this go unnoticed. The school board called an emergency session in the library, a place that suddenly felt too small for the weight of what needed saying. Rows of mismatched chairs scraped across the floor as parents filled them. Teachers stood in the back, arms crossed, eyes sharp with things they hadn't realized they needed to confess. Mac sat near the door, arms resting on his knees, hands clasped. Sully stood behind him, a steady pillar. Nobody from the club spoke unless spoken to. Presence was enough. Ellie sat with a blanket around her shoulders, sipping warm water. Her father hovered beside her, guilt wrapped around him like a second coat. When the superintendent arrived, breathless and pale, she attempted a formal tone but the words wavered. The storm outside howled against the windows. Inside, another kind of storm built. Testimonies were taken. Kids from Ellie's class spoke, voices trembling but honest. They described the laughter that had filled the room before Miss Harrow's anger swallowed it whole. They described Ellie's confusion, her fear, her locked attempts to come back inside. Each sentence was a stone placed gently, but firmly, at the feet of the adults in charge. Then Miss Harrow spoke. Her voice quivered between self-defense and self-pity. She claimed she hadn't meant harm, that the door must have locked accidentally, that she didn't realize how bad the weather was. Gasps peppered the room. One teacher muttered, "We all saw the storm warnings." The superintendent looked exhausted. "Ms. Harrow," she said, "you put a child in direct danger. That is not discipline. That is negligence." Mac didn't move, but the tension in him tightened like a wound-up spring. Not violent, focused. He watched the town reckon with its own reflection. This wasn't about bikers storming a school. It was about people realizing how close they'd come to losing a child because adults had been too slow to see cruelty. Ellie looked at Mac then, her eyes wide and trusting in a way he didn't think he deserved. It did something to him, quiet, permanent, a vow that didn't need words. When the meeting recessed, Mac stepped into the hallway for air. The school smelled like wet coats and cafeteria soap. Snow blew under the courtyard door, dragged in by the wind like a reminder of what almost happened. A few parents lingered, staring at the knot of bikers outside through the glass. Mac recognized the fear in their faces, an old stereotype, sharper than truth. He couldn't blame them. People fear what they don't know. But slowly, as the hours passed, that fear shifted. A mother approached him, arms wrapped around herself. "Thank you," she whispered. "Most folks wouldn't have shown up like this." Mac shrugged. "Most folks don't get asked." She studied him for a long second and then nodded, something like understanding settling between them. Sully walked up beside Mac, hands tucked into his pockets. "Whole town's awake now," he murmured. "This doesn't go back in the box." Mac exhaled through his nose. "Didn't want it to." "Sheriff's reviewing the footage," Sully continued. "Says he'll come talk to you once he's got everything lined up." Mac nodded, though a part of him tensed. Old history between bikers and badges didn't fade like chalk, but Lauren wasn't just a badge. He was the boy who'd ridden with Mac down the Snake River Highway at 17 before life forked them into different kinds of responsibility. Lauren emerged minutes later, windburn on his cheeks, a USB drive in hand. He motioned them to a quiet corner. "I watched the courtyard footage," he said. She pushed Ellie out and locked the door behind her. "That wasn't an accident." The words were steady but heavy. "I'm filing charges." Mac let a long breath leave him, not triumph, not victory, just relief that the truth had a place to land. "Do it right," Mac said quietly. "She answers for what she did, nothing more." Lauren nodded, understanding the unspoken boundary. This wasn't vengeance. This was safeguarding. For once, law and leather stood on the same line. Word traveled through town faster than drifting snow. By late afternoon, headlights glowed through the storm as more parents arrived, their boots leaving urgent prints. Someone brought thermoses of hot cocoa. Someone else brought blankets. It turned into an impromptu vigil. The kind that forms when something almost tragic reminds everyone how fragile community really is. Ellie sat on a bench outside the nurse's office, awake now, cheeks flushed with returning warmth. Kids from her class brought drawings, crooked hearts and suns and stick-figure versions of Ellie smiling. She accepted each one like it was treasure. Mac hovered near the doorway, always in her sight but never overwhelming. He didn't know when she'd decided he was safe, but she had. Children know these things before adults dare to. Ellie's father approached him hesitantly. I never thanked you," he said. Mac shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." The man's voice cracked. I really do. I didn't even know she was missing from class. I trusted," he swallowed hard. "I trusted the wrong people." Mac's eyes softened. "You trusted the system, that's not a flaw. Sometimes systems freeze up. That's when people have to thaw it out." The father nodded, tears threatening but held back. "Why'd you come? You don't even know us." Mac considered that. He thought of the text he'd received that morning. No name attached, no plea, just a blurry photo of a child curled in snow. He thought of the years he'd spent trying not to care too deeply because caring meant responsibility. And responsibility meant loss if you weren't careful. "Because someone needed to," he finally said. "That's enough." Outside, more bikes arrived, not loud, just steady. The rumble softened as engines shut off one by one. Men and women stepped off, shaking snow from their jackets, carrying bags of donated scarves and gloves. They moved without fanfare, without ego. This wasn't a protest. It was a reinforcement. The community would not look away. Night began to fall, turning the courtyard into a dim blue wash of shadows. The wind eased, but the cold settled deeper, a kind of cold that made metal harden and breath ghost in front of lips. People stayed anyway. The school board reconvened to finalize decisions. Through the glass walls, Mac watched them argue in clipped gestures, tight whispers, elbows on the table. Bureaucracy grinding against conscience. Sully leaned beside him, arms crossed. "They'll fire her," he said. "Question is whether they'll admit it was more than poor judgment." "Doesn't matter what they call it," Mac muttered. "Matters that they fix the holes." "You think they will?" Mac's jaw tightened. "They'd better." Because this wasn't just about Ellie. It was about the next kid whose brilliance irritated the wrong adult. The next mistake hidden under paperwork. The next vulnerability that didn't have a biker in the right place at the right time. Sheriff Lauren eventually walked out of the meeting with a clear face and a crisp decision. "She's being taken into custody tonight," he said quietly. Superintendent requested official charges. Endangerment of a minor. A murmur rippled through the gathered parents. Some felt relief, some felt anger. Some felt disbelief that such an event could come from the hands of someone trusted. Mac just nodded once. One clear, heavy nod, not satisfaction, closure. But then something unexpected happened. As they escorted Ms. Harrow out, handcuffed and pale, a small figure stepped forward, Emma, her daughter. She looked terrified, clutching her own worn backpack, confusion etched into every line of her face. The crowd fell silent, even the wind held itself still. Mac's stomach twisted. Kids weren't supposed to bear the weight of their parents' mistakes. Emma stood alone, trembling, looking around for someone to anchor to. And it was Ellie, blanket around her shoulders, still shaky from the cold, who lifted a hand in a soft, uncertain wave. Compassion is strange like that. Children offer it more freely than adults ever manage. Emma's lip trembled as she stepped closer. She didn't understand the words being thrown around, charges, negligence, statements. She only understood that her mother was being taken away and everyone was angry. The officers hesitated, unsure what to do. They weren't equipped to catch tears. Ellie looked up at Mac. "She's scared," she whispered, and something in him softened, the way old leather softens after years of weather, creased but still strong. Ellie stood, her small legs shaky, but she crossed the hallway until she reached Emma. The two girls stared at each other, the harmed and the daughter of the harmer. No scripts existed for this moment. No adult handbook covered it. Emma whispered, "Is my mom a bad person?" Ellie shook her head slowly. "She did a bad thing, but you're not her." That single sentence cracked something open in the air. The sheriff blinked hard. A teacher covered her mouth. Mac felt a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding leave his chest. Emma started crying then, not loudly, just humanly. Ellie put a hand on her arm, a gesture so small it shouldn't have held the power it did. Mac stepped forward. "Sheriff," he murmured, "make sure someone from her family comes. Don't let her go alone tonight." Lauren nodded, because the measure of justice is how it treats the innocent on all sides. A biker named Ghost knelt beside Emma, offering her a pair of warm gloves from the donation pile. "You're not alone, kiddo," he said, voice gentler than his nickname suggested. The town watched, stunned, as a circle formed around two children. Not of force, of protection, of clarity, of community refusing to let one mistake poison more lives. Inside that circle, Mac stood tall but quiet. This was why they'd come. Not to punish, but to prevent the next harm. Not to intimidate, but to stabilize what had almost shattered. And as the storm finally eased outside, it felt like something inside the town eased too. A long-held breath released. A new understanding taking root. The kind that changes how people show up for each other. By late evening, the school was no longer just a building. It had become a shelter, a command post, a place where fear had shown its face and community had answered louder. Volunteers moved through hallways with donated coats. Teachers wrote incident reports with hands that still shook. The superintendent sat with the school board rewriting safety protocols line by line, realizing far too late that rules didn't matter unless people followed them. Mac stood near a trophy case filled with faded photographs of smiling students. He wasn't looking at the trophies. He was watching Ellie trace her fingers over a drawing another student had given her. A comet with a crooked tail. "She likes you," Sully murmured behind him. Mac shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I showed up. Anyone would've." Sully tilted his head. "Plenty of people don't." Mac didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth sat between them like an old scar. Most people walk past suffering without seeing it. Some notice and freeze. A rare few step in. A cluster of parents approached, hesitant. One father extended a hand. "We judged you wrong," he said quietly. "I think a lot of us did." Mac shifted, uncomfortable. "Don't need thanks." "We do," the man insisted. "You taught us something today." Mac looked down at the patch on his jacket, the winged skull, the red and white, the symbol most people only understood from headlines. He'd lived on both sides of reputation. Truth was always messier than news. "We're not saints," he said simply. "We're just people who look out for our own, and today, she was ours." The father nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I hope you don't mind if we consider her ours too." That, more than anything, was the reason bikers had come, so that tomorrow the town would stand up without needing them. Ellie walked over then, tugging lightly at Mac's sleeve. "Can you stay?" she asked. He went still. No child had asked him that since before his own son had died. He thought that part of him had been buried with tiny shoes and old grief. But here she was, small and brave. "Yeah," he said softly. "I can stay a while." Ellie's father watched the exchange with a mixture of relief and something like humility. He pulled a chair beside Mac, sitting awkwardly at first. Two men with wildly different lives, suddenly sharing the same orbit. "I wasn't always a good dad," he admitted, voice rough. "I let work swallow me whole. I kept thinking I'd fix things later." Mac didn't judge him. Grief had taught him how fragile later could be. "You're here now," Mac said quietly. "Kids remember presence more than perfection." The man exhaled, grateful. "When the school called, I thought she fell, or got sick. I never imagined." He couldn't finish the sentence. Mac didn't push him. Outside, bikers rotated in shifts to keep the lot clear and the sidewalks salted. They weren't doing it for show. They were doing it because no child should slip on the same ground where another nearly froze. Inside, kids colored pictures with leftover markers, trying to process the day in crooked lines and bright crayons. A teacher approached the superintendent. "We need trauma training," she said bluntly, "for all staff." A board member nodded. "And transparent discipline procedures." A third added, "And maybe we need to listen more to the quiet kids, the smart kids, the ones who don't fit the mold." It was rare, almost miraculous, to see a town grow in real time. Mac sat quietly, absorbing it. Ellie eventually crawled onto a chair beside him, leaning against his arm the way children do when the world has finally stopped spinning. Her father didn't object. He seemed relieved she had another safe anchor. "Mr. Mac," she murmured. "Yeah, why were you at the school today?" Mac thought of the text he received, the blurry photo of a small shape in snow. He thought of the years he'd spent believing he wasn't built for gentle things anymore. "Because someone saw you," he said, "and someone knew you needed help." She frowned thoughtfully. "Does that happen a lot?" "Not enough," he answered honestly. Ellie nodded, satisfied with the truth. Then she leaned her head against him again, small and warm, a reminder that sometimes broken hearts don't shatter. They crack just enough to let something new in. Sheriff Lauren rejoined them, exhausted but steady. "We're transferring her soon," he said quietly. "Ms. Harrow, she's being taken to county. She won't be coming back to teaching." Ellie flinched slightly at the name, then relaxed when Mac rested a hand on the back of her chair. Lauren noticed the gesture, offered a gentle nod. The sheriff crouched so he was eye level with Ellie. "You did nothing wrong," he told her. "Your answer in class, that was smart, and you're allowed to be smart." Ellie pressed her lips together. "She said I was showing off." "You weren't," Lauren replied. "You were being you, don't let anyone shrink that." Her father's eyes burned. Mac's jaw tightened with a slow pride he didn't expect to feel. Lauren rose, pulling Mac aside. "There's something else," he murmured. "We found older complaints. Nothing official, just notes from teachers who felt uneasy around her." She hit it well. Mac scanned the hallway, the backpacks, the finger paintings, the tiny shoes lined in cubbies. "People hide their cracks," he said, "but cracks spread when nobody checks the foundation." Lauren sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Town's gonna talk for months." "Good," Mac answered. "Talking's the first step to fixing the parts no one wants to see." The sheriff looked at him then, not as authority, but as the kid he used to ride beside. "You did good today," Lauren said. Mac gave a small, tight smile. "Feels like I finally did something right." "You've done plenty right. People just forget good things faster than the bad." Mac nodded. Maybe that was true. Maybe today shifted that balance just a little. As Lauren left to oversee the transfer, Sully approached. "When this storm clears," he said, "we'll ride Ellie to school ourselves. First day back. Make sure she walks in warm." Mac chuckled under his breath. "You'll scare the superintendent half to death." "Good," Sully replied. "Keep standards high." And for the first time all day, Mac felt something like real laughter uncover itself inside his chest. Snow finally stopped falling after sundown. The sky remained a heavy blue, but the wind eased, leaving only quiet, a quiet that felt earned. Parents began heading home with their children, offering soft goodnights and nervous smiles to the bikers standing guard. Teachers gathered their things, some wiping tears they hadn't let themselves shed earlier. The superintendent shook hands with Sully, promising new policies by morning. Promises were easy, follow-through was harder. But tonight, she meant it. Ellie's father carried her backpack while Mac walked beside them. Every few steps Ellie glanced up, checking that he was still there. "Want me to walk you both to the car?" he asked. Her father nodded. They stepped outside into the crisp night air. The snow crunched under their boots. The parking lot, once chaotic, was orderly now, bikers guiding traffic, engines idling low to melt ice patches. "Thank you," Ellie's father said again, the words softer, truer. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you call." Mac didn't respond right away. He wasn't used to being owed favors from quiet men with trembling voices. "Take care of her," he said finally. "She's strong, but strong kids get overlooked." The man swallowed thickly. "Not anymore." Ellie tugged Mac's sleeve. "Will you come visit?" He hesitated. Connection was dangerous. He'd learned that the hard way. But this wasn't replacing his son. This was showing up for a kid who needed more than the minimum. "Yeah," he said. "I'll check in." She smiled, small, tired, but real. Her father strapped her into the truck, tucking blankets around her legs. She waved through the window as they pulled away. Mac stood in the snow long after the taillights disappeared. Sully approached, hands in pockets. "She got to you," he said. Mac didn't deny it. "Feels like she reminded me something." "What's that?" Mac watched the empty road. "That I've still got a little left to give." Sully nodded. "Good, town needs men who don't quit on themselves." And they stood there together, two silhouettes in cooling light, letting the night settle around them like a truth. Most of the bikers headed back toward the clubhouse, engines roaring down snowy roads like a closing chapter. Mac lingered with a smaller group, helping shovel walkways and clear the courtyard where Ellie had been found. He didn't want the snow erased, but he wanted the place to feel different, less haunted, more guarded. As he shoveled, he found the frozen imprint of where she'd curled herself tighter, trying to stay warm. He paused, breath catching. Ghost stepped beside him. "Storm's over, brother," he said softly. "Not inside," Mac replied. Ghost nodded with the tired empathy of a man who'd seen too many storms that don't show up on radar maps. "Kids heal faster than grown men," Ghost murmured. "But they heal better when the men around 'em do the work too." Mac didn't answer. He didn't need to. Eventually he straightened, wiping snow from his gloves. "Let's finish this," he said. Together they cleared the courtyard until only clean paths remained, symbolic maybe, but important. Sheriff Lauren returned one last time, stepping carefully over ice patches. "Transfer went smooth," he reported. "Paperwork starts tomorrow." Mac nodded. "Good." Lauren shifted, hesitant. "Listen, if you ever wanted to do something more formal with the town, mentorship, safety programs, whatever, you've got support." Mac raised an eyebrow. "Me, teaching kids?" Lauren smirked. "Don't pretend you don't care. You're terrible at hiding it." Mac rolled his eyes but didn't dismiss the idea, not out loud anyway. As the last Harley engines rumbled to life, Sully clapped Mac on the shoulder. "Headed in?" "In a bit," Mac said. "Gonna take one more look." He walked back to the school entrance, just stood there. Let the memory of the morning replay, not to punish himself, but to honor how close they came to losing something irreplaceable. He placed a hand on the cold brick. A silent promise. No child would freeze under his watch again. And when he finally turned toward his bike, the night felt quieter, steadier, as if the world had shifted a fraction toward something better because people refused to look away. The next morning broke clear and brittle, sunlight glittering off the snow like shattered glass. Mac hadn't slept more than an hour, choosing instead to sit on his porch with a mug of black coffee, boots up on the rail, watching the world thaw. He replayed moments he wished he'd never needed to witness. A child's shaking breaths, a locked door, a hallway full of adults stunned into stillness. By mid-morning, a rumble of familiar engines rolled up his long gravel drive. Sully, Ghost, and 3 others parked in a neat row. Sully climbed off his bike with a small smirk. "You look like you lost a fight with your own thoughts." Mac grunted. "Thoughts won." "They usually do," Sully replied. Ghost handed Mac a folded newspaper, local headlines stretched bold across the top. "Child found freezing outside elementary, community rallies." A smaller line read, "Local bikers aid rescue effort." Mac frowned. "Didn't do it for headlines." "Doesn't matter," Ghost said. "Town saw the truth, that's enough." Sully leaned against his bike. "Sheriff says the board wants you at a meeting this afternoon. Something about safety reforms, outside advisory presence." Mac blinked. "They want me on a committee? Looks that way." Mac laughed, rough and disbelieving. "That has to be a mistake." "It isn't," Sully said. "They're realizing someone needs to speak for the kids who don't get heard." Mac sipped his coffee, hiding the way that hit deeper than expected. A memory flashed, his own son, 5 years old, asking him to stay for show and tell. Mac had been on the road, he missed it, he'd missed more than that. "I'm not the committee type," he muttered. Sully shrugged. "Maybe committees need less committee types." The wind carried the faint echo of a school bell from across town. Mac listened to it longer than he meant to. "Fine," he said eventually. "I'll go." He didn't say it out of pride. He said it because yesterday taught him something uncomfortably true: showing up mattered, and he was still capable of doing it. The school board meeting that afternoon was quieter than the chaos of the night before. No crowds, no cameras, just 12 folding chairs, a pot of burnt coffee, and a group of officials who looked like they'd aged years overnight. Mac entered in his worn jacket and boots dusted with road salt. They stared at the patch on his chest, but not with fear this time, more like recognition. Respect, maybe. The superintendent cleared her throat. "Mr. Romero, thank you for coming. Didn't give me much of a choice," he said plainly. She almost smiled. "We want to establish new safety measures, door protocols, staff accountability, anonymous reporting channels. But we also want a community liaison, someone parents trust, someone who responds quickly." Mac shifted in his seat. "Why me?" A board member answered. "Because when something went wrong, you didn't freeze." Another added, "And because children trusted you, even in the worst moment." Mac swallowed, uncomfortable. Compliments never sat right. They felt like patches he didn't earn. "I'm not polished," he warned. "Don't need polished," the superintendent said. "We need honest." The board chair slid a folder toward him. "This is a volunteer role. You'd help us design policy, advise during emergencies, attend monthly meetings." Mac stared at the folder like it was a foreign object. He thought he'd left civic life at 16 when he chose asphalt over class schedules. And yet, the idea of contributing something beyond muscle and engines, of protecting kids on a larger scale, settled in unexpectedly. "I'll do it," he said quietly. The superintendent let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. "Thank you." As the meeting ended, one teacher paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, "Ellie slept through the morning. No nightmares. Her dad says you're the reason." Mac nodded once. Then again, slower, letting the truth hit where he rarely let anything land. He left the room feeling heavier and steadier all at once. That evening, Mac rode out toward the edge of town where old fields stretched into the horizon. The road was still patched with ice, but he needed air, clean, open, uncomplicated. He let the Harley glide at a slow pace, the engine vibrating through his bones in a way that steadied him. Snowdrifts shimmered under the setting sun. A hawk circled above a bare oak. It was the kind of quiet that made men admit things to themselves. He pulled off at a turnout overlooking the valley. For a long moment he just stood there, gloved hands resting on the handlebars. Then he reached inside his jacket, pulling out a worn photograph, his son at 5, holding a toy rocket, laughing big. Mac felt that old wound tug. "Kid, I did something good this time," he murmured into the wind. "Didn't run. Didn't freeze." The confession surprised him. He hadn't spoken to the boy in years, not out loud. But yesterday cracked something open in him, the same way Ellie's small hand on his sleeve cracked open the belief that he was done being a father figure to anyone. He slipped the photo back into his jacket, tucking it close to his heart. The wind shifted. Snow lifted like dust. And for the first time in years, the ache inside him felt less like a wound and more like a reminder. The ride back into town was slower, softer. As he approached the school, he noticed a small figure on the steps: Ellie, in a purple coat, holding a thermos. Her father stood behind her. They waved him over. "She wanted to give you this," her father said. Ellie extended the thermos. "It's hot chocolate," she said, for helping me." Mac took it with both hands, not because it was heavy, but because the gesture was. "Thank you, Ellie." She smiled shyly. "Can I ask something?" "Sure. Were you scared yesterday?" Mac thought about lying, then chose truth. "Yeah, when I saw you in the snow, I was scared. But you still helped. That's what courage is," he said. "Being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." Ellie nodded, the kind of nod children file away forever. In the days that followed, the town shifted like ice melting into softer water. Parents met with teachers. New training sessions were scheduled. The district installed door alarms and temperature sensors near outdoor exits. Anonymous reporting boxes appeared in hallways, brightly decorated so kids wouldn't fear them. And on Wednesday morning, in a gesture no one expected, students lined the walkway holding handmade signs that read things like "Welcome back, Ellie." And smart kids shine. Ellie arrived bundled in a warm coat, walking between her father and Mac. When the rumble of Hell's Angels bikes approached from the far road, 30 of them, riding slow so the noise didn't frighten the younger children. The crowd parted in surprise, then awe. They parked in a clean arc and dismounted quietly. No bravado, no theatrics, just a soft honor guard. Sully gave a two-finger salute. "First day back," he said. "Kids should walk in knowing they're protected." Teachers exchanged looks, an uncertain mix of concern and gratitude, but none objected. Truth was, the parents appreciated the gesture. Mac walked Ellie to the front door. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, cheeks pink. "I'm not scared today." "Good." She looked up at him. "If you weren't here that day, would someone else have found me?" Mac hesitated. How do you explain luck without breaking a child's remaining innocence? "Maybe," he said softly, "but I'm glad it was me." Ellie smiled and stepped inside, welcomed by classmates clustered around her. Her father lingered beside Mac. "I don't know how to repay you." "Raise her strong," Mac replied. "Raise her safe. That's more than enough." As they stepped back outside, a teacher approached cautiously. "Mr. Romero, would you consider speaking to some of the older kids next month about community responsibility?" Mac froze. "You want a biker to talk to a classroom." "We want you," she corrected gently. "The kids listened when you spoke." Mac scratched his jaw. "I'll think about it." But inside, he already knew the answer. Yes, for the first time in years, yes. A week later, the snow melted enough for the roads to run clear again. The town didn't forget what happened, they changed because of it. Parents checked on quiet students. Teachers double-checked courtyard doors. The school board passed new protections unanimously. Sheriff Lauren launched a review of substitute vetting procedures. And Ellie, bright, curious Ellie, returned to her science project, rebuilding the parts that had frozen, this time with half the town offering supplies. One afternoon, as Mac walked out of the hardware store, Ellie and her father pulled up in their truck. She hopped out, holding a small wooden box she decorated with planets and stars. "It's for you," she said, "to keep things safe." Mac opened the box. Inside was a single hand-drawn picture, Ellie standing next to him, both smiling, snow swirling around them but not touching. He cleared his throat. "This is something special, kid." "You kept me warm," she said. "I wanted to make you something that keeps your heart warm too." He couldn't speak for a moment. Instead he knelt, meeting her eyes. "You're going to do big things in this world. Don't let anyone dim that." She nodded, a determination far bigger than her small frame. Her father smiled, eyes soft. "Town's lucky you were there that day." Mac looked down the long road slicing toward the horizon. "I think I needed that day too," he admitted. "Reminded me who I still am." And with that, he stood, tucking the tiny box carefully into his jacket, right above the old scar that had never quite healed. Sully's bike rumbled up then. "Ready to ride?" he asked. Mac nodded. Before mounting, he gave Ellie one last look, a promise passed in silence. Then engines thundered to life, rolling out together, not as warriors, but as guardians. The town watched them go, knowing something had shifted forever. Sometimes heroes wear leather. Sometimes salvation is a warm jacket in a storm.